overall, all in all, how do you evaluate the demand of coal itself during this 2023, especially on the second term, and how do you see it domestically in Indonesia?
Well, if we look at domestic production and domestic consumption over the last 10 years, you can say that there are signs that it is increasing exponentially. And I would imagine that what used to be 100 million and 120 million tons is now closing in on 200 and is likely to exceed that in the medium term, largely because of the increase in demand domestically, and also because some new plants are coming up, and also the government priority that is being laid on coal downstream projects and hybrid projects, which can consume a lot more of coal. So we see domestic demand rising in the medium term. And while production cannot keep pace aggressively at the level that we are doing right now, it would mean that there'd be more availability and demand domestically. And as the years go by, our export availability could reduce gradually. So I think Indonesia has set itself a target of 2060 for energy transition into cleaner forms of energy.
Yeah.
So while carbon capture and storage is one technology which is being looked at to burn coal cleaner and prolong the life of coal, there's also investments in the renewable sector. And the way we see it is that the power demand is growing. The GDP in Indonesia is growing. The forecasts are quite bright. And economists are projecting that the Indonesian GDP can be in the top 5 in the next decade or 2 decades, which indicates that demand is on the rise, prosperity is on the rise, industrialization is on the rise, make more in Indonesia is on the rise. And that basically means that there will be a demand for power. And the demand for power at this point of time would largely be driven by coal. But you would also have other forms of energy like renewables, like hydro, like biomass and others, solar and wind. All those would need to coexist for Indonesia to achieve its growth targets.
Okay, so how do you see the outlook for next year as we are reaching to the end of this year? And as you said before, that we are heading to energy transition itself, so there would be a more different choice of energy, like you said before. So how do you see the outlook for the next year, especially when we're talking about energy transition?
So if we go back 10, 20 years, the annual rate of growth in coal consumption has been about 3%. Now, in 2023, it was higher than that. When we are looking at 2024 onwards, and we are seeing what are plans in China, India, and Indonesia for various projects, including downstreams and hybrids, we think that the growth in Asia is going to drive the global demand. And I would peg the growth in Asia at around 5%. It could even be 6% higher when we look at 2024, and that is reflected in the national policy of higher production. Medium term, we already know that there are massive plans for coal downstream and other projects. There'll be huge runs on power. And in the interim period, definitely, it will be coal, it will be fossil fuels, and it will be supplemented by renewables. So we think that we are positive and that we are optimistic on the prospects of the sector.
Okay. So as you said earlier, that for coal itself will use the technology of CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, storage in the future. But one thing that we know, the investment is quite big. So how do you see from the investment strategic itself, and how about the low calorie of coal? Will it use also CCUS also, or what do you think about that?
You see, CCUS is a technology that was recommended in the early 2000s by IEA. But in the next decade, which is the 2010 to 2020 decade, unfortunately, there wasn't much investment in that area. And it was really the drive for cleaner energy that took precedence over carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Now, we do have 16 such plants in the US. We have a mega plant in Japan. And I understand in Europe, there are also major strides in research on this. Bumi itself has 3 coal-fired captive power plants. And we are examining the possibility of putting in carbon capture, utilization, and storage, not only for our captive power, but when we have our coal downstream projects and our non-coal diversification projects, in the initial stages, when we consider coal and hybrid power, definitely carbon capture, utilization, and storage will be part of it. The constraint in carbon capture, utilization, and storage is that not enough money has been allocated for research in this very important area. And we believe that the action really is not so much with the coal producers. We produce the coal, but we do not really produce the power. The action really is with the power plants themselves to invest. Now, in the Western world, you are seeing this happening, whether it's the US or Europe or Japan. But in Indonesia, I think there is now a move, and I believe it's part of regulation that this has to be explored. I know that the oil and gas sector is investing a lot in this, and I believe it is also time now for the coal consuming sector to step in and to also try and invest in R&D so that we can produce CCUS capability at a far cheaper cost.
Okay, so it's quite optimistic actually. And last but not least, how do you see the price of coal at the end of this year and also the outlook for 2024?
You see, price has been influenced in 2022 largely by non-coal sector factors, which was geopolitics, it was the economics, they were the wars, they were the inflation, there was flagging of demand, there was a hysteria towards an immediate move from fossil fuels to renewables. Now, all those factors have all intertwined and played a role. So you had prices which were $48 in 2016, crossing $400 per ton in 2022. And this year, we are not seeing prices of 48, but we are still seeing prices in the region of $120 to $150 per ton. I think the prices are sustainable. And we think that the current prices are in contango, so there's every chance that the price can rise. It's an issue of supply-demand. We are seeing signs of El Nino or drier weather, so there can be more availability. And when there is more availability, it can impact supply. We know that China is increasing capacity in coal. We know that India is increasing capacity in coal. And we've already noticed in Indonesia that the numbers are going up. And like what CNBC said earlier, it's looking like 775 million tons when it used to be just 400 or 500 million tons 8 to 10 years ago. So definitely, more availability is going to impact what is pricing. But we are confident that the prices of around 140, 150, 160 are sustainable.
Okay.
And if whether an unusual factors intertwine, or if there are geopolitical factors which intertwine, the coal price can also shoot up higher and higher, like we saw in 2022. Our challenge really is high fuel prices. Our challenge also is the very high levies and royalties and the subsidies that we provide on price. Now, if policies become a little
Yeah.
friendlier, more
Okay.
friendlier towards the sector, I'm sure we can do
Okay.
more.